For 9 years, the Central Intelligence Agency hunted a ghost who walked through the highest levels of American defense infrastructure without leaving fingerprints, photographs, or witnesses who could describe his face with any consistency. The ghost had a name in classified files, Sergei Rodionov. The ghost had a cost, $4 billion in compromised nuclear weapons research and 17 dead American intelligence assets across 3 continents. What the ghost did not have, according to every psychological profile and surveillance analysis conducted between 1970 and 1978, was a single human weakness that counterintelligence could exploit. Until a routine vice investigation in Manhattan accidentally discovered that even the world's most disciplined spy needed something that would ultimately destroy him. 1978 marked the 9th year of what the Soviet Union's first chief directorate considered their most successful deep cover operation on American soil since the Manhattan Project infiltrations of the 1940s. Sergei Rodionov had entered the United States in 1969 through a legend so carefully constructed that it included a complete childhood in Cleveland, a deceased mother whose grave the KGB had actually purchased and maintained, and a father whose identity had been stolen from a merchant marine who died in the North Atlantic in 1943 before any official birth certificate was filed. The legend gave Rodionov something that traditional illegals never achieved: complete freedom of movement through Defense Department facilities, nuclear research laboratories, and NATO strategic planning sessions where his security clearance, built on a foundation of forged documents that trace back 30 years, never triggered a single verification flag. He had stolen electromagnetic pulse research that set American missile defense back a decade, photographed encryption systems that compromised State Department communications in 47 countries, and identified every CIA officer operating under diplomatic cover in the Soviet sphere of influence, leading directly to the execution of 12 human intelligence sources whose interrogations before death revealed American collection priorities that the Kremlin exploited for years. The CIA's counterintelligence division maintained a task force of 43 officers dedicated exclusively to the Rodionov case, a resource allocation that Director Stansfield Turner personally authorized in 1977 after the compromise of the SALT II negotiating position cost the United States critical leverage in arms control discussions that would define the strategic balance for the next decade. Dennis Wright commanded the task force from a windowless office complex in McLean, Virginia, where teams worked in 8-hour shifts, analyzing every piece of intelligence that might reveal how Rodionov operated, who he contacted, where he transmitted the secrets he stole with mechanical regularity. The task force knew that Rodionov used dead drops in Rock Creek Park, but surveillance teams never caught him servicing them, despite deploying motion sensors, infrared cameras, and officers who spent months memorizing the face of every person who entered the park during hours when drops appeared. They knew he communicated through shortwave radio, but signal intelligence never isolated his transmissions from the thousands of broadcasts that filled the spectrum each night. They knew he had to have a source inside the Pentagon's Research and Development Directorate, but polygraph examinations, financial audits, and lifestyle investigations of 400 personnel with appropriate access revealed nothing actionable. The break came from an investigation that had nothing to do with Soviet espionage and everything to do with an extortion scheme targeting wealthy businessmen who patronized luxury hotels in Midtown Manhattan. Federal agents from the Organized Crime Strike Force had been monitoring the Roosevelt Hotel for 6 weeks, documenting how a prostitution ring used hidden cameras to blackmail married executives when they noticed a pattern that didn't match the typical operation. One woman, identified as Lisa Wright, met the same client every Tuesday evening at exactly 9 o'clock, always in the same suite on the 23rd floor, always paid in gold coins that numismatic experts later identified as pre-revolutionary Russian imperials, worth far more than their weight in gold. The client never stayed longer than 90 minutes, never deviated from his schedule, never met Lisa anywhere except that specific room. FBI liaison officers brought the surveillance photographs to the CIA as a courtesy, expecting nothing more than a routine check to confirm the client wasn't a foreign intelligence officer using prostitutes to compromise American officials. Instead, Facial recognition analysis matched the client to 3 separate sightings near Defense Department facilities where classified material had disappeared, and linguistic experts analyzing audio recordings from directional microphones outside the hotel suite identified speech patterns and occasional Russian words spoken during moments of stress that matched profiles of deep-cover KGB officers trained at the Red Banner Institute. The realization that Sergei Rodionov, the phantom who had evaded the most intensive counterintelligence operation since the hunt for Kim Philby, maintained a weekly appointment with a 26-year-old Korean-American woman who knew him only as Michael, represented either an unprecedented intelligence opportunity or an elaborate dangle designed to destroy the CIA officers who tried to exploit it. Dennis Wright made the decision in a 5th-floor conference room with 3 witnesses and no written record. They would turn Lisa Wright into an operational asset. They would wire the suite. They would map every second of Rodionov's routine. They would exploit the one human need that even 9 years of perfect tradecraft couldn't eliminate. The operation began the following Tuesday. Lisa Wright arrived at the Roosevelt Hotel, carrying a purse that contained a transmitter smaller than a lipstick case. Sergei Rodionov arrived 4 minutes later, exactly on schedule. He would never leave that hotel alive. Lisa Wright had never planned to become an escort, much less an asset for the Central Intelligence Agency, hunting the most dangerous Soviet spy operating on American soil. Her path to room 2307 at the Roosevelt Hotel began in Seoul in 1952, where her mother worked as a laundress for the 8th Army during the final year of the Korean War, and met a logistics sergeant from Ohio who promised marriage and a new life in America, but disappeared 3 weeks before Lisa was born, leaving behind nothing except a surname her mother adopted to give her daughter a chance at acceptance in a country that treated mixed-race children as permanent outsiders. Lisa arrived in San Francisco in 1963 at age 11, speaking minimal English and carrying dreams that died quickly in the Tenderloin district, where her mother cleaned hotel rooms 14 hours a day and still couldn't afford an apartment without cockroaches and a landlord who accepted sexual favors as partial rent payment. She learned English by watching television in hotel lobbies while her mother worked, learned about American culture from guests who occasionally gave her tips for running errands, and learned about the economic reality of beautiful Asian women in 1970s America, when modeling agents offered her contracts that inevitably revealed themselves as introductions to wealthy men who paid thousands of dollars for discretion and companionship that never appeared in any legal contract. The money changed everything in ways that Lisa's mother never understood and never forgave, creating a rift that ended with her mother returning to Korea in 1976 with enough cash to buy a small restaurant in Busan and a final conversation where she called her daughter a whore in Korean words that cut deeper than any English translation could convey. Lisa built a client list of executives, diplomats, and politicians who valued her intelligence as much as her beauty, who appreciated that she could discuss international relations and classical music with the same fluency she brought to more intimate activities, who trusted her discretion absolutely, because she understood that her business model depended on secrets remaining buried. She charged $500 for an evening, maintained an apartment in the Upper East Side that cost more than most families earned in a year, and told herself that she controlled her life in ways her mother never could. Then Michael appeared in 1977, requesting her through a referral from a State Department official, and everything about him felt wrong from the first meeting. The way he never looked directly at security cameras, the obsessive ritual of checking every corner of the room before relaxing, the gold coins he counted out with fingers that trembled slightly, as if touching American currency caused physical pain. Dennis Wright recruited Lisa in a coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment on a Wednesday morning in February 1978, sitting across from her with a manila folder that contained photographs of her with Michael, financial records documenting every payment he had made, and transcripts of conversations with other clients that proved the FBI had been monitoring her for 6 months as part of the extortion investigation. Wright explained that she faced federal charges for prostitution that would guarantee deportation to South Korea, where her mother's restaurant had recently been purchased by a businessman with connections to the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, who would be very interested in hearing about an American prostitute who serviced diplomats and politicians with access to classified information. Or she could cooperate with an operation that would last no more than 3 months, require nothing except continuing her existing arrangement with Michael while wearing a wire, and result in all charges being dropped along with a payment of $50,000 and a guarantee that her identity would remain classified permanently. Wright gave her 12 hours to decide, knowing that she had no choice but needing her to believe the decision was voluntary, because unwilling assets made mistakes that killed operations and the people running them. The technical team installed surveillance equipment in Suite 2307 over a single weekend, replacing light fixtures with models containing fiber optic cameras, embedding microphones in electrical outlets that transmitted to a receiver station in the room directly below, and modifying the telephone to allow monitoring of any calls made from the room, even though Michael never used the phone, in ways that suggested he trusted it for anything except the most banal conversations. They briefed Lisa for 16 hours over 4 days, teaching her how to position herself, so cameras captured Michael's face from multiple angles, how to encourage conversations that revealed biographical details without seeming interested in interrogation, how to recognize signs that he suspected surveillance and abort the evening before he could disappear forever. They prepared her for violence by showing photographs of KGB officers who had killed American intelligence sources when threatened with exposure, including images so graphic that Lisa vomited in a trash can and asked if she could still change her mind, receiving only Dennis Wright's flat statement that backing out now would result in immediate arrest and deportation within 72 hours. The first Tuesday after the suite was prepared, Lisa arrived at 8:45 in the evening, wearing a dress that concealed the transmitter taped against her ribcage and makeup that hid how little she had slept in the previous week. She unlocked the suite, confirmed that everything appeared normal, and sat on the edge of the bed trying to control breathing that came too fast and shallow. Michael arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, knocking 3 times with a rhythm that never varied. She opened the door. He entered carrying the same leather briefcase he always brought. He counted out 15 gold coins onto the dresser. Then he pulled a Makarov pistol from the briefcase and aimed it directly at her face. His voice carried a Russian accent he had never revealed before. Every word sounded like a death sentence. He knew exactly who she was working for. He knew everything. The Makarov pistol that Sergei Rodionov pointed at Lisa Wright's face was a 9mm semi-automatic weapon issued exclusively to KGB officers, recognizable by the star stamped on the grip and the serial number that had been methodically filed away to prevent tracing, held with the steady grip of someone who had killed before and understood that hesitation in moments of crisis led to capture or death. Rodionov stood 3 feet from the door with his back to the wall that provided no camera angle, a positioning that revealed he knew exactly where surveillance equipment would be placed in a room designed for intelligence collection, and his eyes held the flat affect that CIA psychological profiles associated with officers trained to eliminate threats without emotional interference. He spoke in Russian-accented English that erased 9 years of carefully maintained American pronunciation, asking Lisa a single question that contained no inflection, suggesting he cared whether she answered truthfully or lied. How long had she been working for American intelligence, and did she understand that cooperation now represented her only chance to survive the next 5 minutes? The transmitter taped to her ribcage broadcast every word to the monitoring station 1 floor below, where Dennis Wright and 4 technical officers listened to their operation collapse in real time while trying to decide whether breaching the room immediately would save Lisa's life or guarantee that Rodionov killed her before tactical teams could cross the threshold. Dennis Wright had planned for 16 different scenarios where the operation could fail, including possibilities that Rodionov might detect surveillance equipment, recognize Lisa as an asset, or simply deviate from his pattern in ways that suggested suspicion. None of those scenarios accounted for Rodionov walking into the suite with full knowledge of the operation and choosing confrontation over escape, a decision that violated every principle of deep cover tradecraft, where preservation of legend took precedence over all other considerations, including eliminating threats to operational security. A trained illegal who suspected compromise should have disappeared immediately, activating exfiltration protocols that would move him through a network of safe houses to a Soviet diplomatic facility and eventually to Moscow, accepting the loss of his current operation as the cost of surviving to operate again. Instead, Rodionov stood in a hotel suite surrounded by CIA surveillance equipment, speaking Russian-accented English that destroyed his legend permanently, holding a gun on an American citizen, while federal agents listened from 30 feet away. The choice suggested either supreme confidence that he could eliminate witnesses and escape, or a calculation that his mission in the United States had reached completion and he could afford to burn his identity if the final act served Soviet intelligence interests in ways that Wright couldn't yet comprehend. Lisa answered in a voice that shook despite her efforts to maintain composure, explaining that the FBI had threatened her with deportation unless she cooperated with monitoring his visits, that she had no choice except agreeing to wear a wire, that she knew nothing about who he really was or what made him important enough to justify federal surveillance. Rodionov listened without lowering the pistol, his expression unchanging as she spoke, and when she finished he asked a second question that revealed how thoroughly he had researched her background and understood the psychological levers that would determine whether she told truth or attempted deception. Did her mother know that her daughter had become a prostitute who serviced Soviet intelligence officers, and would Lisa prefer that her mother learned this information from Korean intelligence services who would visit the restaurant in Busan, or from Lisa herself in a letter that could be mailed before unfortunate events made such communication impossible? The question confirmed that Rodionov had conducted surveillance on Lisa's surveillance, tracking her movements and relationships thoroughly enough to identify her mother's location and circumstances, demonstrating a level of preparation that suggested this confrontation was planned rather than improvised. Wright made his decision based on acoustic analysis that detected strain in Rodionov's voice, indicating elevated stress despite his controlled demeanor. A physiological marker suggesting the Soviet officer was operating outside his comfort zone and might be vulnerable to disruption. He activated his radio and ordered the breach team to move, knowing that the next 30 seconds would determine whether they captured the most valuable intelligence asset the Soviet Union had operated in America since World War II, or whether Lisa Wright died on camera, while Rodionov escaped through protocols that the CIA still didn't understand after 9 years of investigation. The breach team consisted of 8 officers from the Special Activities Division, personnel selected for their ability to operate in confined spaces against targets trained in counter-assault tactics, moving through the hotel corridor with suppressed weapons and ballistic shields. They reached the door to Suite 2307 40 seconds after Wright gave the order. Rodionov heard them coming. Every intelligence officer trained at the Red Banner Institute learned to recognize the specific sound pattern of tactical teams moving with speed discipline. He shifted his aim from Lisa's face to the door. His finger tightened on the trigger. Lisa screamed. The door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted with a volume that shattered the illusion of controlled operations. Someone hit the floor. Blood sprayed across expensive wallpaper. The shooting stopped. 3 bodies lay motionless in the suite. Rodionov was not one of them. He had vanished through a door that every CIA floor plan indicated led to a bathroom with no secondary exit. The tactical team searched for 17 seconds before discovering that the bathroom's ventilation shaft had been modified to allow passage into an adjacent suite, and that suite connected to a service stairwell that Rodionov was already descending. Dennis Wright stood in the hallway, listening to radio reports that the target had escaped the building. 9 years of investigation, billions in compromised secrets, one chance at capture, gone in under 3 minutes. The 3 bodies in Suite 2307 belonged to CIA officers who died because Dennis Wright had underestimated how thoroughly Sergei Rodionov prepared for contingencies that most intelligence officers considered paranoid fantasies. The first officer took a 9mm round through the gap between his ballistic vest and helmet as he entered the room, a shot placement that required both exceptional marksmanship and intimate knowledge of American tactical equipment configurations that the KGB had apparently obtained through channels the CIA still didn't understand. The second officer died from a round that ricocheted off his shield and entered through his armpit, a probability so statistically unlikely that it suggested either remarkable luck or Rodionov's understanding of angles and bullet trajectories exceeded what normal weapons training provided. The third officer survived the initial breach, but bled out from a femoral artery wound, while his teammates pursued Rodionov through the service stairwell, dying in Lisa Wright's arms, while she pressed her hands against a wound that pumped blood faster than pressure could contain. The Roosevelt Hotel became a crime scene that required 6 federal agencies to coordinate jurisdiction, generating paperwork that would remain classified for the next 50 years, and questions from hotel management that the FBI answered with national security letters threatening prosecution if any employee discussed the events of that evening with anyone including family members and attorneys. Dennis Wright spent the 72 hours following the botched capture operation in a 5th-floor conference room at CIA headquarters, reviewing surveillance footage frame by frame and trying to understand how Rodionov had known about the operation with enough advance warning to prepare an escape route that required days or weeks of preparation. The surveillance team tracking the hotel confirmed that Rodionov had not entered the building at any point in the 2 weeks before the breach, except for his regular Tuesday visits with Lisa, which meant he had somehow identified the suite modification during his normal 90-minute appointments without triggering any of the behavioral alerts that technical officers monitored for signs of counter-surveillance awareness. Acoustic analysis of recordings from previous visits revealed nothing suspicious until linguists noticed that Rodionov had asked Lisa to adjust the room temperature on 3 separate occasions, requests that required her to walk to the thermostat mounted on the wall directly adjacent to the electrical outlet containing a hidden microphone. The thermostat itself showed no signs of tampering, but metallurgic testing detected traces of gallium on the wall plate, a soft metal used in sophisticated electromagnetic detection devices that could identify powered surveillance equipment through wall materials without physical contact or visible scanning behavior. The realization that Rodionov had been aware of the surveillance for potentially weeks before the confrontation transformed Wright's understanding of what had happened in Suite 2307 from a tactical failure into something far more disturbing. A deliberate provocation designed to achieve objectives that remained unclear even after extensive analysis. A rational intelligence officer who detected surveillance would abort the operation and escape, not confront the asset while surrounded by federal agents and surveillance equipment that documented his identity and destroyed his legend permanently. Unless destroying his legend served a purpose that outweighed 9 years of deep cover operations. Unless the confrontation itself was the mission's final phase. Unless Sergei Rodionov had already accomplished everything the KGB needed him to achieve, and his exposure was calculated to deliver a message that the CIA would spend months or years trying to decode. The breakthrough came from an FBI analyst reviewing financial records who noticed that the gold coins Rodionov used to pay Lisa Wright had not been random currency, but specific Imperial Russian 5-ruble pieces minted in 1913, the final year before World War I destroyed the old order and created conditions that allowed the Bolshevik Revolution. Numismatic experts confirmed that the specific coins matched a collection stolen from a New York auction house in 1976, a theft that had been attributed to organized crime and generated minimal investigation because the insurance company settled the claim without dispute. Cross-referencing the theft date with classified material compromises revealed that 1976 marked the beginning of a dramatic increase in leaked Defense Department research, suggesting that Rodionov had acquired the coins specifically to establish a payment pattern that could later be traced if investigators connected the right data points. The pattern indicated planning that extended years into the future, a level of strategic patience that suggested Rodionov's entire operation might have been designed from the beginning to end in exactly the way it had ended, with exposure that would force the CIA to question everything they thought they understood about Soviet intelligence operations on American soil. Wright authorized a task force expansion to 140 officers working in 3 shifts, analyzing every aspect of Rodionov's life in America and searching for the thread that would lead to his location after the Roosevelt Hotel escape. They tracked the service stairwell to a loading dock where security cameras showed him exiting into an alley at 9:23 in the evening, approximately 8 minutes after the breach. Traffic cameras captured him entering a taxi 4 blocks north at 9:31. The taxi driver remembered the fare because he paid with a $50 bill for an $11 ride to Union Station and told the driver to keep the change, unusual generosity that drivers remembered and reported, when federal agents canvassed cab companies throughout the district. Union Station surveillance showed him purchasing an Amtrak ticket to Boston at 9:57. But when agents met the train in Boston, no passenger matching his description disembarked, suggesting he had left the train at one of 6 intermediate stops or never boarded at all, using the ticket purchase as misdirection while exiting through a different route. The actual trail led in the opposite direction through a pattern so subtle that it took behavioral analysts 3 weeks to identify it. Hotel records showed that a guest matching Rodionov's general description had checked into a Quality Inn in Arlington, Virginia, at 11:47 that same evening, paying cash for a week in advance and providing a Delaware driver's license that later proved to be high-quality forgery. The guest remained in the room for 6 days, ordering room service meals that arrived at precise 12-hour intervals and never leaving except for brief walks that surveillance cameras tracked to a nearby pharmacy where he purchased over-the-counter medications consistent with treating minor injuries. On the 7th day, a woman matching Lisa Wright's description entered the hotel at 2:15 in the afternoon. She went directly to his room. She stayed for 43 minutes. When she left, federal agents who had been monitoring the hotel as part of a routine follow-up investigation arrested her in the parking lot. Lisa Wright explained that Rodionov had contacted her through a coded newspaper advertisement, using a phrase they had discussed during one of their early meetings as a signal that only she would recognize. He offered her $100,000 in exchange for delivering a package to a specific location in Georgetown, providing detailed instructions that included multiple verification protocols to ensure she wasn't under surveillance or coerced into cooperation by federal agents seeking to use her as bait for a second capture attempt. She had agreed because the money represented escape from a life she had never chosen, and because some part of her believed that Rodionov had shown her more genuine humanity in their brief encounters than most of the men who had purchased her time over the previous decade. The package contained a microfilm cassette with documentation that would later reveal the identities of 47 CIA officers operating undercover in Eastern Europe, intelligence that resulted in the largest mass expulsion of American personnel since the Cold War began, and confirmed that Rodionov's final act before exfiltration was ensuring that the damage he caused would continue accumulating long after his departure from American soil. The Georgetown drop site led to a safe house that surveillance teams monitored for 11 days before occupants arrived. 2 KGB officers traveling under diplomatic credentials who entered the property at 3:30 in the morning on March 15, 1978. Federal agents arrested them before they could retrieve the package, but diplomatic immunity guaranteed their release within 48 hours, along with expulsion from the United States. Neither officer provided any information about Rodionov's location, and signal intelligence intercepts of Soviet communications revealed nothing except confirmation that an asset designated Konstantin had successfully completed his mission and returned to Moscow for debriefing and recognition that would include promotion to full colonel and assignment to training the next generation of illegals who would operate in American territory using methods refined through his 9 years of undetected operations. Dennis Wright received a letter of reprimand for the operational failure that resulted in 3 dead officers and the exposure of 47 intelligence personnel, a career-ending document that forced his retirement from the Central Intelligence Agency in 1979 at age 52, with a pension and a security clearance that prohibited him from discussing anything he had learned during his 30-year career. He died in 1993 from a heart attack while watching television coverage of the Soviet Union's final dissolution, never knowing that Sergei Rodionov had been executed in 1985 during a KGB purge after Oleg Gordievsky's defection, revealed that Rodionov had maintained an unauthorized relationship with an American woman that violated every protocol governing deep cover operations and represented a security breach that Soviet intelligence could not tolerate even in their most successful officers. Lisa Wright received full immunity from prosecution in exchange for her testimony at classified hearings that examined how the operation failed and whether different tactical decisions might have prevented the deaths of 3 federal officers. She used the $50,000 the CIA paid her to open a Korean restaurant in Seattle, operating under her mother's maiden name and never revealing to anyone except a therapist she saw weekly for the next 20 years that she had once been the most important asset in the hunt for the Cold War's most successful spy. She died in 2006 from ovarian cancer, surrounded by friends who knew her as a successful businesswoman and grandmother of 4 who sometimes spoke about her past in vague terms that suggested she had lived through events she could never fully describe. The Roosevelt Hotel remained operational until 2006, when the building was converted into luxury condominiums. Suite 2307 was purchased by a retired investment banker who never learned that the walls contained surveillance equipment that had been left in place when the CIA closed the case, equipment that remained powered and transmitting to a receiver station that no longer existed, broadcasting an endless signal that no one would ever hear into empty frequencies where ghosts spoke to ghosts about secrets that had long since stopped mattering to anyone except the historians who would eventually discover them.